History remembers him as a monster, a man who turned entire cities into ash and left mountains of skulls behind him. But before Genghis Khan became the most feared conqueror on Earth, he was a boy abandoned in the frozen wilderness, betrayed by his own people, and left to starve. Imagine being a child who learns that kindness only leads to death, and that survival means striking first, harder than anyone else. What transforms a starving boy into a ruthless empire builder whose cruelty shook the world? Before he was feared as Genghis Khan, he was simply Temujin, a boy born into the endless winds and wild horizons of the Mongolian steppe. His childhood was far from the life of a destined conqueror. He grew up in a nomadic family, their world, made of felt tents, roaming herds, and the fragile peace of clan alliances that could shatter at any moment. To outsiders, this was freedom, open skies, endless land. But for a child like Temujin, it was a world balanced on the edge of survival. When he was just 9, that fragile balance collapsed. His father, a clan leader, was poisoned by rivals, and the security of leadership vanished overnight. Without protection, Temujin's family was abandoned, left alone in the wilderness where winters froze flesh and summers offered little more than dust and hunger. His mother, strong but desperate, struggled to keep her children alive, scraping roots from frozen ground and fighting off starvation with sheer will. Temujin felt the sting of betrayal not just from enemies, but from his own people who turned their backs when he needed them most. Even within his family, tensions ran deep. Brothers quarreled, survival pitted blood against blood, and trust became a dangerous luxury. These early years shaped him in silence, branding lessons into his soul. That mercy could invite death, that weakness destroyed families, and that betrayal was never far away. To live, he had to become harder than the land itself, colder than the winds that whipped across the steppe. And though the boy endured unimaginable hardship, no one could yet see the storm rising inside him, one that would one day change the fate of nations. Temujin's childhood left him scarred, but it was the years that followed that sharpened those scars into weapons. As he grew older, he learned that survival on the steppe was not about fairness. It was about power. Clans rose and fell overnight, and mercy was often rewarded with betrayal. Temujin knew this truth better than anyone, for his own life became a cycle of loss, captivity, and revenge. At one point, he was captured by a rival tribe. Still a young man, he was forced into slavery, his hands bound, treated as little more than an animal. Each lash of humiliation burned into him, teaching him what it meant to be powerless. But against the odds, Temujin escaped. That night under the stars, running barefoot through the cold steppe, a fire lit inside him. Never again would he wear chains. Never again would he allow himself to be weak. If Temujin's struggle grips you, stay with me, because what happens next will shock you even more. His escape was just the beginning of a path that turned pain into power and betrayal into one of history's darkest legacies. Don't miss what comes next. But survival demanded more than escape. It demanded dominance. Slowly, Temujin began to gather loyal followers, men who were also outcasts, fugitives, and dreamers of a new order. They saw in him a leader unlike the others. Where Mongol chiefs ruled by bloodline and privilege, Temujin rewarded loyalty and punished betrayal without hesitation. He broke traditions that had stood for centuries, forging his own path through sheer will. Yet cruelty stalked his every step. To secure power, he often relied on brutality that shocked even his own people. He would order entire villages destroyed if they defied him, sending a message that resistance was not only futile, but also fatal. And with each ruthless decision, his legend grew darker. Was it justice for the betrayals of his childhood, or simply vengeance magnified into empire building? The stakes continued to rise. Every rival clan became both a threat and a test, each battle forcing him to prove that fear could bind people together stronger than loyalty. He watched as enemies who once mocked him bent the knee, or were wiped from the earth. But the cruelty he unleashed did not just terrify his enemies. It reshaped the very spirit of his own followers. Every victory hardened him further. Every betrayal reminded him of the poisoned cup that killed his father. Every night on the battlefield whispered the same truth. Kindness was weakness, and weakness had no place in the empire he envisioned. The turning point came not in whispers of betrayal, but in screams of annihilation. Temujin, now feared as Genghis Khan, faced cities that dared to defy him. To some, surrender was survival. To others, resistance was pride. But for Genghis Khan, defiance was unforgivable. One city in particular sealed his transformation. After promising safety to those who opened their gates, a group of rebels killed his envoys. An insult so grave it struck at the heart of his code. To Khan, betrayal demanded not just punishment, but erasure. What followed was a storm of cruelty unlike anything the world had seen. His armies swept through the city with fire and iron. Streets ran red. Thousands, men, women, children, were slaughtered, their screams swallowed by the roar of flames. Survivors were left only as warnings, shadows of terror stretching across the land. It was no longer about survival. This was vengeance, magnified into policy, cruelty woven into the foundation of empire. Mercy was abandoned. Fear became his most powerful weapon. From that day on, word of Genghis Khan traveled faster than his. Armies, entire kingdoms surrendered at the mere whisper of his name, terrified of suffering the same fate. And yet, behind the thunder of hooves and the silence of smoking ruins, one question lingered. Was this the only path he believed the world had left him, or had cruelty itself become his destiny? Don't look away now. The story doesn't end here. What followed would not only shake empires, but change the course of history forever. Stay with me, because what comes next will reveal the true impact of his cruelty and why the world still feels it today. The ashes of that city were not the end, but the beginning. From that moment on, Genghis Khan's cruelty became a weapon sharper than any sword. Whole nations crumbled without a fight, not because his armies had reached their gates, but because terror already lived inside their walls. He understood something chilling. Fear could conquer faster than bloodshed. But the cost of such power was immense. Millions were displaced or destroyed, cultures erased, entire regions scarred for centuries. And yet, paradoxically, his empire also brought stability to the Silk Road, trade to distant lands, and systems of law that would echo long after his death. His cruelty did not only destroy, it reshaped the world. Historians still argue, was Genghis Khan a brutal monster or a man forged by betrayal and suffering who believed only fear could hold an empire together? Perhaps he was both, a child abandoned in the cold, grown into a leader who inflicted the same coldness on the world. And this is where the story grips us most. Not in the battles he won, but in the haunting truth behind them. When cruelty becomes the price of survival, does it ever stop? Or does it consume the very soul it was meant to protect? Genghis Khan's legacy is a mirror, reflecting not only his world, but ours. How far would we go if survival demanded everything? And how much of humanity would we be willing to sacrifice along the way? If this story shook you, don't let it end here. Watch till the last second, leave your thoughts below, and subscribe for more journeys into the darkest corners of history. Because sometimes, the past doesn't just tell us who they were, it warns us about who we might become.